Let's get started. Um, the aim of this evening's meeting is to hear from members of the council who have proposed amendments uh, to the charter that they would like to make us aware of. Councilwoman Ramos and Councilman Dorsey are the members of the Baltimore City Council who are scheduled to be with us this evening. I don't see them here yet. If staff could make me aware when they enter the room, or perhaps reach out to them and see if they still plan on attending, that would be good. In the meantime, I want to.
Councilmember Dorsey is in attendance now. They're currently muted. They've joined us by phone.
Okay, great. Good evening.
Oh, sorry for the delay. I was really struggling there to log in.
Yeah, we've had those challenges. But thank you for joining us. We're glad that you're with us now. While we give it a few more minutes, Commissioner Montes de Oca, did you want to give a brief update on the work of your committee?
I can.
That
Let's
would be
see.
good. Just for the purposes of keeping everyone kind of aware of what's going on, I'll ask Andy to do the same for the Executive and Administrative Functions Committee, and then perhaps someone from the Finance Committee can also offer some brief update.
So in our last committee meeting, we reviewed a lot of the proposals related. A lot of them are related to the redistricting. I believe Councilmember Dorsey has a proposal related to redistricting. There's a write-on petition related to redistricting. So we reviewed all those. Commissioner Ellis has a lot of proposals that we reviewed. One of which I've recommended that we put on the agenda for the next full commission meeting on the 26th. And that's regarding conflicting charter amendments that make it onto the ballot. Oh man, my mind just went blank about our next scheduled meeting. I believe we were looking at April 2nd, if I'm correct, to follow up on the proposals in our committee and hopefully to either have motions or to vote on some of those proposals so that way they're ready for the full commission. And I can recirculate the list of pending proposals that are in front of our committee so that the full commission can have them. None of them have been officially taken by our committee yet. None of them have been voted on, but I can circulate that again so everybody knows what we're working on.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, comments, or additions to Commissioner's update? All right. Commissioner Ellis, would you give an update from our committee, please?
Sure. So we met, I think, last week maybe, and we had a good discussion about one of the proposals that I had submitted, which was to create an Office of Nightlife. I presented that proposal and I shared some materials about it, about what New York City and DC are doing. And then we had a discussion similar to the one in the other committee about what to do when there are conflicting charter amendments. And there was a sort of broad ranging discussion about what the charter does, how to deal with conflicting things, and how frequently questions win. I think our next steps there are to figure out which proposals we want to vote on in our committee, you know, to hear what the counselors have to say tonight.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Any questions for the Executive and Administrative Functions Committee? Right. I don't see our co-chair, Terrell Boston Smith, with us yet. So is there anyone from the Finance and Oversight Committee who feels comfortable making a brief update? Okay, well, if not, then Councilman Dorsey, we want to welcome you to this meeting of the Charter Review Commission. We're happy to provide you with an opportunity to share your ideas about how to amend the Baltimore City Charter. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and to all the members for having me. And thank you all for serving on this commission. I sent, Ben has just circulated a document I sent just a couple of hours ago. I kind of jotted down some ideas. I've been really busy lately, so I kind of put this together fairly brief. I come across kind of a lot of different ways, you know, especially that I think the charter should be amended, particularly when bill reports say that the city council doesn't have the authority to do something that would seem perfectly reasonable and well in line with what local governance should be able to do. And there are also I think some bigger things. So the first thing on my list here, which I take it as something in line with what some of you've already discussed in some capacity, the idea to restructure the city council. And as we all know, the Fox Baltimore guy is petitioning a question on to reduce the city council size. I hope you'll all agree with me that that size that he wants to reduce it to is completely arbitrary, and the proposal is without merit. It doesn't seek to solve any particular problem. Whereas I think that we do have an inherent problem in the system of electing a city council president at large, separate from all of the rest of the membership of the body. And I think it would be I think it's actually a fundamental problem in the city that we do this. I think that it's foundational to a lot of our problems of the system of checks and balances, as well as just the general tenor and productivity of the city council. I think that is with good reason that virtually no other legislative body in the world in history has ever elected a single at-large representative the way that Baltimore City does. I think that it is that there is an inherent bias that's brought to the body by one person having a disproportionate and very different source and level of power than the rest of the members, and that it's fundamentally anti-democratic to have a person presiding over a body that is not chosen to preside by the members equally elected. You know, I think that this makes it so that we are a city where we don't have so much an executive branch functioning in checks and balances with a legislative branch, but rather, particularly given the very strong mayor system that we have, we essentially have an executive versus a pseudo executive. Instead of the city council president being a true reflection of the majority will or a collective kind of consensus built from among the members, we have a person who picks winners and losers from among the otherwise elected, equally elected members. I think that this is a problem also because it perpetuates a system of money in politics kind of ruling the day. When your city council presidency is determined so differently from the rest of your city council membership, where the city council presidency is, a battle that has to be fought on a different level of fundraising capacity than the rest of the membership. What you have is people only able to compete by raising big amounts of money. Whereas if you elect members equally by district, where, one district might have a very different kind of economic kind of status than another district. You could have a district where it's competitive for one member to raise $40,000 or $45,000 in a district, and another district where you would be uncompetitive if you didn't raise $125,000 or more. And by electing people simply by district without a city council president, you give equal voice to each of those two different districts, the one that raises, where that's competitive at 40,000 and the one that's competitive at 125,000, in choosing who is to be the presiding officer over the council. I think that this is a really important change that absolutely needs to be made for the future welfare of the city. I sent around, along with this list of interests of mine, a copy of a petition that I had drawn up. The only reason I'm not petitioning it out there right now is because I simply don't have the capacity to lead a petition drive effort. And I think it would be really wonderful to have this proposal come out of the Charter Review Commission. Shall I take questions about my different concepts one at a time, or should I kind of do a rundown of my thoughts? How would you all like this to go?
If you would, Councilman, go through all of your proposals, and then at the end, we can come back and ask questions or offer comments.
Great.
That way it guarantees that you get an opportunity to present all of the ideas without interruption.
Thank you. So number two, there are several things in here that just pertain to aspects of the council's authority to legislate. I think I prefaced this in my opening kind of comments. One of the things that we face year after year in the budget is, criticism from state legislators that we don't use our budget powers properly or well enough. And then I have to explain to them that they think that we have the same powers that they do, and we don't. One of the critical ways in which the state budget is determined each year is by what they generally kind of colloquially refer to in the House and the Senate as budget language, where it is possible to, and I'm sure that Matt Stegman can speak to this, where it's possible to use kind of narrative language to make certain demands of state agencies that they provide certain things, and only upon providing certain things will funds be conditionally released to them. It's an important way of leveraging agencies to actually do things that the legislative body sees necessary. We don't have that power in the city, except with entities that are otherwise completely out of our control. We can't do this with DOT and DPW the way that the state can. I think it's fundamental to our ability to use the budget process democratically to have the ability to set conditional constraints on whether or not funding is released. I've cited the charter language that has been cited to that would need to be amended in some way in order to affect this. The third thing is the council's ability to legislate on employee benefits and hiring, and I've given a couple of examples about this. I have wanted for many years to pass a policy on what's called parking cash out, and this is how I come by this particular provision in the charter. Parking cash out, for those who aren't familiar, is a policy whereby an employer who spends money to provide a parking benefit to any of their employees must provide that employee an option to take the cash equivalent of what the employer spends on parking as an alternative. This has been a statewide law for any employer of over 50 employees in California for more than a decade, maybe a decade and a half or two now. And it's a policy that is enacted by plenty of employers, even here in Baltimore City. I know that it has been a policy at T. Rowe Price for many years. We cannot enact a policy through a legislative process by ordinance here because the charter gives only the Board of Estimates the authority to direct how employee benefits are to be administered by the Department of Human Resources. And so I would love for the council to have the authority to similarly legislate on this matter. I think it's not something that necessarily needs to be exclusive to the Board of Estimates. Similarly, when Shannon Sneed introduced a bill some years ago to prevent the city from denying employment to certain entry-level labor workers and folks who are not in charge of heavy machinery and such, to prohibit the city from using marijuana as a screening protocol for employment. Similarly, we were told by this same provision in the charter that we could not do that. I think that these things are well within what the city legislative branch should have the ability to legislate on. Several years. Yes, sir.
If you would let me jump in just for a second. And
sure.
Deep apologies to you. Ben and Nina, are we joined by Charm TV or are we recording this meeting?
Yes, Charm TV is currently recording. You'll see Michael Wells as a participant. That is Charm TV recording this. I'm also taking minutes at the time.
Thank you so much. My apologies, Councilman.
No, thank you. Further on council authority to legislate, the idea of employee take-home vehicles. We have certain employees who are granted take-home vehicles, some of whom are driving them 50 and 60 miles sometimes outside of the city to go home to and from work each day. And there seems to be no logical reason why they should need to be given this city vehicle to do this at the taxpayer's cost. Unfortunately, we're told that only DGS has the authority to determine who gets to drive a vehicle. But interestingly, DGS leadership says that they have never had anything to do with this whatsoever, that it's determined solely by the employee's agency, and that the agency sets all of their own criteria over who gets this. So I think that I don't actually believe the interpretation of the code or the application of the charter as it's been given in the past. But since the charter has been used to obstruct the ability for the council to do something that I think is perfectly reasonable and well within what we should be able to legislate on, I think that means that the charter needs to be amended to get out of the way of something that's perfectly reasonable. Term limits. I don't think I need to say much more than we need to repeal term limits. I don't care how politically unpalatable it might be to talk about it right after it was enacted by a ballot referendum. It's terrible public policy to have term limits for legislators. And I think that if we are responsible as stewards of our democracy and our ability to govern without the chaos of needless turnover in our government, then we have a responsibility to the taxpayers to talk about and educate as to why this is bad public policy. I'm not really going to dwell on this any longer. council authority to legislate. Again, I don't know all the ins and outs of why so much of our procurement process is mired down in the charter as opposed to by ordinance in the code. But it seems like we should be a lot more flexible than we are. That this is something that we should be able to put in through ordinance. One thing that is a continuous problem on contracts, particularly of a large size, is low bidder contracts, which are rife with opportunity for cost overruns and often end up being the low bid on the backs of wage theft and other employment place problems. And I won't go into all of those, but I think suffice to say that it would be in the public's interest for us to be able to employ a responsible bidder standard for anybody seeking to bid on city contracts, and put other conditions in place other than simply being the low bid on a contract, which is just such a problematic way to bid. The last thing I'll talk about, again, is another point of just council authority in general. We have had numerous, so I use Complete Streets as an example, in where we, how do I want to put this? Well, there are just places throughout the charter where an agency's head is established and given certain broad authority, and that gets interpreted all too often, I think, as saying that they have the end all be all authority, that the city council, the members of the legislative branch elected by the people of the city, shall have no ability to guide or direct or constrain that use of authority granted to city agency heads in any way. It seems to be very inconsistently espoused that our authority is limited in this way, but it does happen in different ways. And as I've noted here, there are also cases where even after we pass a bill that has not been objected to, where we have not been told that it infringes upon some unilateral authority of an agency head, after the fact, after the bill has been passed and has become law, we go back to agencies to actually hold them to apply the law as it's been written, only to have them give us kind of be rebuffed and basically have them indicate that they don't think that the law actually applies, that it's mere guidance and that they don't actually have to adhere to it. I think it should be made clear throughout the city charter that where city agency heads are given broad authority, that it is not without being subject to ordinances that might otherwise guide and direct the usage of that authority. So I'm sure I could talk about charter amendments a lot more. If I gave a lot more thought to this, I could probably spend several months pulling a lot of things out of the charter. But I think that this is a good enough bunch of things that I would be very happy for the commission to take up any of these. And certainly there are ones that I have, well, I don't know, I hold them all as equal, but I really do think that the term limits and the structure of the council are truly detrimental to the future of the city.
Thank you, Councilman Dorsey, for your presentation and for the thoughtfulness with which you have applied your intellect on these issues. Commissioners, if you have questions for the councilman, please feel free to chime in. You're also welcome to put your questions in the chat. Questions for Councilman Ryan Dorsey?
I have a question.
Hi, Andy. Thank you for serving on the commission.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate it. So term limits. Council will eventually have to pass a bill about term limits if we want to get it on the charter. Why does this commission need to take that up if most of the council agrees with it? If most of the council agrees with repealing it?
I don't think that most of the council necessarily does agree with repealing it. I didn't have a majority of the council co-sponsor the bill that I introduced to put the question on the ballot.
Okay. So you think that if the commission suggests that it will give it the it will give it an additional help to get the votes you need?
I think that it'll give, and look, it's not imperative that it be passed, that we put it on the ballot, immediately. The term limits that have been enacted don't affect anybody until 2032. And so but I think that it gives real credibility to the conversation and to the need for us to talk about why this is so bad for democracy, if it comes also from this commission.
Thank you.
Other questions for Councilman Dorsey?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I have two questions.
Please.
So my first question, Councilman Dorsey, is that you have some items here about the authority to legislate, and they go into some rather granular detail about legislating employee benefits and take-home vehicles and fringe benefits and things like that. I wonder, if this commission takes this on, would we find ourselves in a couple of years having to get into modifying the charter in order to authorize other sorts of little details in order to allow the council to do its work? Or is there perhaps some other way that the charter could be amended to grant broader authority so that we don't have to get down into all this nitty gritty?
It's an interesting question. I don't particularly know how, and I'm sure that the law department could suggest a way that there might be some broad stroke that could be added to the charter to grant the council, very broad authority in ways that it might not be interpreted today, but I doubt it. I think that and I think that it's been well recognized over many years that the charter gets into things that are too granular, and that many of those things don't belong in the charter, should be in ordinance, and that the charter should be limited to much more general framing of the government structure. And I think that the only way to really correct that is to kind of laboriously go through and take out those things which don't belong there. And I don't, I'm sure that plenty of what's in the charter is not going to run afoul of kind of constraining the council's ability to legislate in any, short term. But I think that there are other ways we will continue to see. I think that you do some now and you do some later. I don't think it's, don't do it now because we might end up having to do more later. I think you have to do some now, and I think you have to do some later, for sure.
Okay. And then my second question is really a request for you to educate me a little bit more.
Sure.
And it's about the number 6 on your item for procurement, and about the procurement process to be through low bid. Could you please walk me and walk us through a little bit of the procurement process? Because I'm familiar with the state process where it is not necessarily always just lowest bidder, but I don't know how it works in the city.
To be honest, because it's overseen by the Board of Estimates and comes through the finance department's procurement office, and it's mired in so many layers. It's almost unnavigable in a way for me. There are so many different stages of the procurement process. I just know in general that on basically all contracts in the city, lowest bid rules the day. That's basically it. It's a blunt tool that there is kind of little room to deviate from. The only other the ways that I know that it's deviated from in certain ways are things like the use of professional services contracts as opposed to like a professional services consultant contract to be a sole source on something as a workaround for having to bid something out because of low bidding or other procurement challenges that we face. I think that I just know that it's an area that's many layers, that there are, if you look at Mayor Scott's agenda, and if you look at the business community's agenda, if you look at the contracting, construction world's agenda, reform of the procurement processes of the city has been on everybody's kind of very short list of necessary reforms for a long time. And I know that essentially, I think that one of the most uniformly recognized problems with our outcomes to our contracts is the reliance kind of at the end of the day on low bid as kind of the end all be all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, other questions for Councilman Dorsey? Councilman,
Yeah, hey,
go ahead.
Wanted to ask, and first off, Councilman Dorsey, thank you. I know you and I have, spent a long time over the years talking about a lot of these issues. So, very much appreciate you being here tonight to expound on them. In terms of the council structure, could you talk a little bit about what you would envision? I think your points about the role of campaign finance in the dynamic of the council is well taken. And I guess the devil's advocate argument to that would be, if you have a number of council people who elect somebody among themselves, is it reasonable to think that the person they might pick is somebody who can help them electorally, somebody who can, fundraise and slate up and take advantage of some of those tools. So are we shuffling around the role of money?
Thank you,
in
Matt.
the council power dynamic?
This is a great question. This is I'm so glad that you brought this up. Yes, the specific way I put a lot of thought into specifically how the council, the proposal in the petition that I shared is structured. And it specifically mitigates this concern by requiring that the council president rotate every 2 years. So within the structure, so what I propose is that, path of least resistance, don't think about changing the size of the council. Keep the size of the council as it is today. Today we are kind of 14 plus 1. So we are 15 members. Keep that 15 member structure. And then also do away with term limits. But within the council, have a limit of 1 2-year term to serve as the council president, so that no person can serve for more than 2 years. So even one full 4-year term, so that it's always rotating midterm and at the beginning of the next term. And I think that this is also really important for the democratization and the making the common use of all of the positions that are allocated to the council president's office. Right now, we have a whole host of positions for the council president's office that are, community outreach folks and liaisons that are largely duplicative of council staff and council members who are already out in the community in the districts that they represent. We could much better use those resources of staff to serve the body's interest, allocate more of those positions to policy research and fiscal responsibility and research, and many other roles that could be played to advance the legislative work of the city. But I think that's much better done if they know that they work for the body and that their boss is definitely changing, isn't a boss so much, that the presiding officer is changing every 2 years, so that they're not using either that staff or the position of the office to do the kind of thing that you're talking about, wielding the office and their status in the interest of electoral matters. Does that answer the question? I feel like it's kind of in the vein.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you very much.
Yeah, rotating every 2 years, I think, is essential. It's what other legislatures do.
Other questions for Councilman Dorsey?
Yes, Councilman Dorsey. Good evening. Joshua Harris here, District 9. I am wondering if you could speak to, I'm having a bit of trouble reconciling, or you mentioned like democracy specifically in reference to the council president proposal. I'm having trouble reconciling the fact that the ultimate form of democracy is the will of the voters and the citizens, and wanting to remove that from the citizens to put it in the hands of the council. Coupled with the fact that when I look at most jurisdictions that have a similar legislative body, majority of them have an at-large position that is elected citywide and recognized by the voters across the city and or county, which would be the most popular elected official outside of a county executive or the mayor across the entire jurisdiction. And I believe that that's necessary to have that representation on the council. If you could speak to why you don't believe that would be the case here.
Sure. First of all, I don't think that it is the case that most jurisdictions elect people into their legislative body in the way that we do. Most jurisdictions that elect people at large elect multiple at-large members. And Philadelphia, for example, is a body where there are multiple at-large members, as well as the multiple single-member districts. And then the body still, from among all of them, elects a presiding speaker or council president, whatever they call it. And all members are equally eligible to be elected as that presiding officer, whether you were elected at large or whether you were elected as a district member. Baltimore County does not have any at-large elected members. I don't believe that Anne Arundel County or Carroll County has any at-large elected members. It's not normal to do what we do at all. And I think it's because democracy has to be looked at as being multi-layered and multi-dimensional. That yes, democracy does exist when people directly elect representation, but democracy has to exist with the same level of ideology within the body itself. The body itself must function democratically. And that can't happen when you have unequal membership within the ranks. And so while I know that one of the most challenging points of pushback is, the voter who says, well, I get to vote for 2 people on the city council right now, you are seeking to weaken my democratic power by only allowing me to vote for one person. It has to be recognized that electing 2 people does not improve the outcomes of that democratic body in that person's interest necessarily. Especially when we elect representation by plurality, it's very possible that, for example, you have a city council president who is elected by 1/3 of the voting population, and they then let's say I'm a voter and I vote for candidate A, but candidate C is elected with 1/3 of the voting population. Well, also I voted for my district representative, and my district representative won 85% of the vote. But my person who I elected in my district with 85% of the vote was a supporter of candidate A, who didn't win by that plurality of 1/3 that candidate C won for the city council presidency. Candidate C turns turns your district representative into essentially persona non grata. And so I'm not winning in that situation just because I got to vote for one of those two people. I'm losing because the person that I elected to represent my district now can't do anything in the city council because the council president who won doesn't like them.
So, and I'm sorry, just for a follow up to that, I understand that. And that sounds more like politics, right? Than policy, effective policy. And I get that, but I'm also having trouble reconciling. And I've seen it happen where you have members who are elected from a council body to be president, but the politics are still clear and the same, right? And I don't see that that's going away. And so I'm wondering what makes you think that the politics will vary simply because now they would be elected from the body. It doesn't change who's most popular, who has the most money, who has most flex on between those council members individually. That those politics will always exist, unfortunately.
Yeah. Look, it's a political field. The politics are always going to exist in some way. But if the body isn't electing its own leadership by consensus building within the body, then the leadership isn't a majority representation of the body and doesn't have any obligation to act in representation of the majority will of the body. When the council president gets to pick winners and losers as to who is empowered and whose ideas get advanced on their unilateral authority, then that undermines anybody who, may differ in their opinion from the president from having any ability to get things done. It's a system of having to pay loyalty and fealty to one person who doesn't have any obligation to build consensus or have any respect for the majority in general. It's just anti-democratic.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions for Councilman Dorsey? Your questions, commissioners, are welcome. Councilman Dorsey is having the time of his life.
I've been doing it for 7 years. I can't get enough of it. I do have to be at a community association meeting in like 10 minutes. So if there are no other questions, I appreciate the time that I've been given.
Well, I certainly have a couple of questions for you, but let me first say, Councilman, thank you. I think that you have acquitted yourself well, not only in presenting your ideas, but also in explaining them and defending them. I certainly had some concerns about the first proposal that you made. I think your responses to Commissioner Stegman and Commissioner Harris kind of drew out your position. I don't know that I agree with them, but I do know that you have democracy as your main concern, and I appreciate you for that. Hoping that on the question of on the question of the council's ability to, I think, direct is one of the terms that you used. Can you explain how that's separate from the council's responsibility to provide oversight, and how this is not an infringement upon the executive? I mean, what I think I'm hearing you say is that this direction would be direction through legislation, not the day-to-day management of a particular director. But just wanted to hear from you that that's what you meant.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Look, I think that we set up a framework within which our agencies operate, right? You know, we as a council consider ideas like whether or not facial recognition technology can be used by our city agencies, right? That's a way that we just draw lines. We create boxes within which our agencies have to operate. And the oversight, yeah, you know, we use the bully pulpit in different ways to conduct, you know, so-called oversight. But we also direct legislatively how things work. And so, and there are just ways that I think are perfectly reasonable for us to do that, which we seem to be precluded from doing.
And traditionally, we've had a strong mayor, weak council system. And that in many ways has been anti-democratic. Tell us how you see giving the council more budget authority and more authority in general is good for democracy and good for the electorate, and doesn't create a logjam, or it does, but it's still good for democracy.
Look, I think that we elect people in whom we place trust, right? And so when we give elected representatives the tools to be able to govern, we trust that they will be used wisely, judiciously, in the public's interest. And that I think that if you look at the kind of the long history and the general kind of year-to-year way in which the city operates, you know, I've been on the council for 7 years. We've passed 7 budgets without, you know, delay or conflict. You know, we get, you know, there hasn't been a government shutdown or anything like this, right? You know, I think that we are largely responsible in our thinking about how the city should work, and none of us wants us to just like become dysfunctional, or would put up roadblocks to that. And I think that that's, you know, that's always, hopefully, always going to prevail as the majority will of the city council, that the government shall function. But I do think that it's beneficial for us to have additional tools. Look, I could sit here and give you a laundry list of the things that have been committed to me and committed to other council members during budget hearings, where we make requests that certain information be given and requests that information be given by a certain date. I can also give you probably a laundry list of the things that we could be asking for well in advance of one budget so that we can consider it for the next, or something like that, that never materialize and that are never given to us in good faith by city agencies. We simply do not have the tools at our disposal to get agencies to comply with perfectly reasonable requests and timelines to achieve certain things. And this is a tool that the state has that there's no reason why the state should be given tools that we at the local level can't equally exercise. And I think this is also back to the point about the structure of the council. There's no world in which we would hear the United States Senate or the Maryland Senate or the United States Congress or the Maryland House of Delegates propose that in addition to electing all of the members by district of those bodies, that we should also elect the Speaker of the House at large across the United States, or also at large elect the President of the Maryland Senate from among all of the voters of Maryland. They do it certain ways in virtually every legislative body around the world and at every level of government for good reason. And there's no reason that we should be different fundamentally from that. And these budget tools, like being able to constrain the budget based on conditions placed on things, this is what's commonly used in Annapolis by the state to just get, say, an agency to submit a report on time and things like this. These are not, these are not hammers that are brought down in really terrifying ways. These are subtle tools that get used. And I think that when you look at the majority will, the majority is not going to let these tools be used in detrimental ways. They're going to understand the nuance and the discretion with these things need to be used. I trust enough in the people of Baltimore to elect representatives who will use these tools wisely.
Thank you, Councilman Dorsey. We appreciate your input.
Thank you, Reverend. Thank you, everybody, for having me here tonight. And thank you for letting me take so much time. And thank you for the patience of my colleague. Good night.
Absolutely. Good night. Councilwoman Ramos, welcome to the Charter Review Commission for Baltimore City. Glad to have you join us this evening. And the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the commission for serving. This is a big job. And so I'm grateful for your time. Before I go into my remarks, I just want to say that I support the councilman's proposals. I think that obviously very well thought out, but also I think they will make a big difference in our governance. I do think that having a council president that is elected by the body means that a council president will work for the body. And I've always thought this for the last 30 years that I've been in Baltimore, because I do think that it makes a big difference to have a body that, elects its leader and then is working to have a council that, works together. So, and a lot of other reasons. So just wanted to say that. Councilman Dorsey did take one of mine. I have two topics. He did also add one of mine, which is the issue of best value in procurement. And just so you know where that is in the charter, it's Article 6, Section 11. So it's page 176 of the charter PDF. And basically what those clauses say is that when there is a bid process, that the Department of Finance, who does the procurement, is obligated to take the lowest bid. As long as all the qualifications are met from the bidders, take the lowest bid. And so what happens, and I think the councilman explained it pretty well, but I wanted to just add that what we have seen is that when there is the lowest bid, often there are change orders, because certainly as you dig whatever you're digging and you get and you see that there may be some overruns, certainly you want to get those changes in. But we have definitely seen abuse. The Druid Hill project is the cost overruns are ridiculous. And so we should have those monitored, and it really needs to be a best value system. This is something that would allow us to do point systems, and then make sure that our values are put into the contract. So minority contracting, so additional points for meeting those goals, project labor agreements, hiring local. So it gives us a lot more flexibility to make sure that we're accomplishing our goals and not just low bid. So that was one of mine. And I just wanted to add to what he was saying about how important this is. And I believe one of the commissioners did ask sort of how that works. And it's pretty well explained in the charter what the process has to be for procurement, and what we're asking for is an amendment. I will say that we recently had a hearing on the procurement system. When Mayor Scott first came on, one of the things that the city administrator at the time had promised us that he would do, and they did start at that time, is a full top-down, in-out review of our procurement system. The Finance and Performance Committee just recently had a hearing to hear what that evaluation is, what the results are. And one of the things that had been the delay, because right now we're basically in year 4 of our term, was that there was no chief of procurement. And so the administration recently hired a chief of procurement who was from Virginia. And he basically said during the hearing that, and we can certainly get all the materials to you if that would be of interest to the commission. He said during the hearing that best value, what we just talked about, is actually best practice across the country. And so, you can listen to the hearing. I can send you those materials. But that is something that is needed. I believe that the administration was planning on coming to us with that amendment, but I do not know that for sure. So I know the councilman wanted to make that point, and I wanted to just double that effort. So thanks for letting me add to that conversation. My second piece, and I don't know if I have sharing privileges here, but my second proposal was to create, and Andy, I did get your email, and I apologize, I have not, or Commissioner Ellis, excuse me,
Councilwoman,
I have
Councilwoman,
not.
Councilwoman, if you hold 1 second. Okay, you have presenting.
Great. Okay, thank you. Let me find the correct screen here. There we go. Thank you so much for allowing me the screen share. Okay, so what I'm proposing is that currently the Department of Legislative Reference exists as underneath the mayor and city council as one of the agencies. And as we know, our Department of Legislative Reference is amazing. They do important work. What I'm trying to do is create the Department of Legislative Reference back into an independent entity, which it was a few years ago. And there was a charter amendment to change it to be part of the mayor and city council. My idea is to make it back to an independent entity and to broaden its scope. Okay. And part of this is modeled after the Department of Legislative Services in the General Assembly. And so the problem that I'm trying to solve is that often when we are, or I shouldn't say often, all the time, when we are presented with legislation, there are two sets of things that occur. One is that the council services does a summary of the bill and puts the packet together and is the staff to the committee that works on the bill. Every agency then does a bill report, and that is from the agency's perspective. So we've seen in a couple of times where if the administration does not like a bill, they will make the cost super high in the finance report. Or do something in the report that would say that this is not something that they approve. What I'm trying to get is an independent entity that would do an independent analysis, similar to what's called a fiscal note in the General Assembly, that would give us an analysis of the bill, the fiscal impact, and also an equity analysis as how this is going to affect the city given the equity lens. And so what I have before you here, the other thing is this. One of the things that we learned during the inclusionary housing discussions is that nobody trusted anybody's numbers. Nobody trusted the developers' numbers. Nobody trusted the finance committee, the finance department's numbers. Nobody trusted the advocates' numbers. And so we were left with just trying to figure it out, or, make our case based on that. So what we want to do is have a Department of Legislative Reference that not only drafts the bills, but a separate section where they would analyze the bills and give us the important analysis from an objective point of view, and not from one view of the administration or another view. We want to have objective information to make decisions based on good information. So the first part, this is the draft that I've submitted to DLR, but certainly would love to have the commission consider it for their work. This first part is about creating and nominating the director. And the current charter says that the Department of Legislative Reference would be created by a board, or the director would be hired by a board from the mayor's office, the comptroller's office, and the council president. We have here back to 2, and I know sometimes 2 is a not always a great number to use because of the you need an odd tie to an odd number to deal with a tie. But we felt that really it's the mayor and the city council that would be working with this Department of Legislative Reference much more than the comptroller would. So I'm open to discussion around that. This is all about filling the vacancy, and then the powers and the duties. So we've added in here the power and the duties of the Department of Legislative Reference would be general research and policy analysis. There would be a policy analysis report for every bill that would have the current law, fiscal impact, policy impact, equity impact, small business impact, etc. I have to tell you, we had a very, I'm just going to be frank about it. We had a very interesting issue happen again during the inclusionary housing discussions, where it was very clear that the inclusionary housing bill absolutely has, makes sure that we're addressing the racist housing policies in our city. And I won't go into the whole thing, but the Office of Equity, which was supposed to be doing the equity analysis, gave us a bill report that basically said, well, this is all fine and good and it does that, but if we don't have the money, then it's not equitable. And it's like, so they wrote a report that doesn't, really support their work as the Office of Equity. And again, we also had, different things happening. So that sort of impetus, I've always thought that this was important, and I wanted to do it for a long time, but wanted to really see how the things were working before being able to propose this. So we would also have this Department of Legislative Reference do an objective budget and fiscal analysis. We do not have that capacity in the council now. I know that the council president is trying to make that happen, and has hired analysts, but we really need that fiscal services so that there can be an because still right now the budget comes from the mayor, the council can move money around, but it's still a strong mayor system. And so having an objective entity that does the budget analysis is really important. We would still have them do the drafting, so it'd have to be a separate division to draft the bills, etc. Now, I toyed with what to do with the law department, right? Because the law department gives us the analysis of the bills that says whether it's legally sufficient, meaning that if we pass the bill, no one's going to sue the city, right? Or it's against the U.S. Constitution or the state constitution. I think that we may need to leave that there, but I'm willing to have the discussion of how we make that integrated into the Department of Legislative Reference. And then I've added the library services that it already, and the archive services that it already does. So that is really my proposal for this. Again, the department exists, and yes, we would have to give it more money and more capacity in order to accomplish the goals that I've set out in my draft. But I do think it is extremely important from a good governance perspective that we have objective reports, objective analysis, where they're not, beholden to the mayor's office or to the council, and we can trust that they will come to us with with that analysis. So I'm grateful for the time, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ramos, for a very thoughtful presentation. Commissioners, if you have questions for Councilwoman Odette Ramos, please chime in now. You can also put your comments in the chat or questions in the chat.
If nobody else wants to go first, I have a question.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Councilwoman Ramos. It's always a pleasure to talk to my councilwoman, and I appreciate the thoughtful proposal. So in what you're proposing for reorganizing legislative reference, what would be the role, or how does that bump up against the role of the Office of Council Services? Because I think in theory they're supposed to be doing a lot of the and sometimes do a lot of the kind of analysis of individual pieces of legislation, the kind of fiscal note type of analysis that you're describing. And I think it may be an issue where there's an office that already does some of this that maybe could use additional resourcing in light of the council's current responsibilities. And do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, currently, I think there's only one of the committee staff that is doing actual analysis, and that may be just something that we need to talk with council services for. There would still need to be a council services in terms of the staffing, unless we make that, I don't know that we can make that part of the Department of Legislative Reference, because the council services serves the council. And so I would keep the staffing of the committees under council services. But the analysis piece, again, the summaries, that's fine. But the analysis piece would go with the Department of Legislative Reference.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman. Other questions for Councilwoman Ramos?
Commissioner Ellis has his hand up.
Oh, please.
Yeah, so thank you for this presentation. I had started this conversation last week in one of the committees, and we were just talking about really repealing question G and reverting back to the old way that it was before. But I appreciate the forward-looking way of how to address this. One question that I want to ask is, under this proposal, it would remove the option of the council to take something through this department and make it a requirement. Is that the case?
I'm sorry, say that again.
All legislation before the council would have to go through this department under
That's
your proposal?
correct. That is correct.
Okay.
Yep. And that's actually in our council rules as well, currently. And just for your edification, I have a draft of updated council rules. That's not something that you need to deal with, but something that we'll be sharing at some point. But yeah, everything should be written through the Department of Legislative Reference. Yep.
Excellent. Thank you.
Other questions for Councilwoman Ramos? Well, Councilwoman, I want to thank you for your presentation. I think that you identify a number of problems that demand solutions, and I think that you've offered some solutions to those problems. Two things I want to raise for your response. One is on the issue of the interpretation, not just whether or not proposed legislation meets a standard, but also on the interpretation of the city charter. as it stands now, the city solicitor's office, which is an extension of the mayor's office, offers legal opinions on a wide range of issues. And I'm wondering if you see some value in this new construct of placing an office of legal review or legal opinion to be an independent bureau that does this review, and rather than having one that serves the interests of the office of the mayor.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And I had been thinking this through whether or not to integrate sort of the legal piece into the Department of Legislative Reference. I had not thought about whether you kind of fold it in or not. One challenge that we do have, and this goes to your question, is that there is often times where the legal opinion that we get from the law department favors the administration over the council, even though they are also our lawyers too. And so I do think that we can have that discussion about whether or not to go ahead and put the legal opinion, particularly for bills, under the Department of Legislative Reference. I don't have it there now, but I'm interested in thinking about that discussion because I do think that there is that bias, frankly, with the law department.
Absolutely. And on that same note, the issue that you raised with the council and the mayor being represented by essentially the same firm, that is a conflict of interest that exists across city government and between multiple agencies and the administration. So I really think between this body and the council, some further thought needs to be given to creating some opportunities for independent counsel. Because, for example, with the Civilian Review Board, we saw over and over again
Right.
the same law firm that was representing the police department was also saying that it had the right to represent the Civilian Review Board, which in theory is an independent agency. And so I think it's important in that instance, one, to have an independent body that can interpret what the law says on that issue, and then also the capacity to have separate attorneys or separate sets of attorneys representing city agencies that from time to time may have conflicting interests or things that may appear to be a conflict of interest. The other question that I have for you is related to this issue of independent agencies. There are a number of independent agencies in city government. You're proposing another one. For this particular independent agency that you're proposing, you have given a framework for how oversight would work. The oversight would be the mayor and the council president and the comptroller. In general, I am concerned that we have independent agencies that don't have appropriate oversight, and that there are other agencies that should be independent, like the Office of Equity and Civil Rights. The Office of Equity and Civil Rights should not be an extension of the mayor's office if it is charged with investigating and holding the mayor's administration to account for equity and civil rights issues. But that's a separate question. My question for you is, what are your thoughts about how we provide oversight for independent agencies?
Mm-hmm. Well, in this particular case, it made sense to do the council president and the mayor only because the Department of Legislative Reference right now is simply for working with the mayor's office and the or working independently with the mayor's office and council president's office. As you remember, I introduced the charter amendment to make sure that the office of the inspector general was truly independent, right? Because it was initially an office that had, which was it's a very important office. It is independent. But initially it was there were elected officials and city employees on the board that oversaw the inspector general, which doesn't make any sense because the inspector general actually investigates elected officials and city agencies. So I am grateful for this body, the people, members of this body. You weren't a body then yet, but who supported that. And we might want to think about doing independent agencies if we are going to do it with that type of oversight where we have to, the members of the council select especially with the PAB as well. And then there's representation that way, as opposed to the way that the boards are typically chosen, which is nomination from the mayor and then advice and consent from the council. So we certainly can look into what type of independent agencies need to have that kind of oversight that we address in the charter, and it isn't necessarily just the same advice and consent. Because the PAB right now is independent that way. The CRB is not. And then we've got
the CRB is supposed to be.
Supposed to be, I know.
Right.
And then the office of the Office of Inspector General. The Department of Legislative Reference, I think, is slightly different only because it's such a internal facing organization that helps to help the governance run. But I'm open to discussion about if we have a different type of board.
Right. All right. Are there other questions or comments for Councilwoman Ramos?
Yeah, I have another question about that last point. So the old way that this was structured had people outside governing prior to 2018, right? The board had people outside of the governance governing the stuff that was internal facing. Why not go back to a model like that and instead put it in the hands of the political decision makers?
I'm open to the discussion around how we want to have making sure that the Department of Legislative Reference actually performs the way that I had articulated it. And if this body thinks that we need to have a different type of board, I'm open to it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions for Councilwoman Ramos?
I'd just like to say, as someone who's the chair currently of the Police Accountability Board, I appreciate your statements on the importance of independent counsel.
I'm familiar with what's going on there, and I appreciate the advocacy of you and others that are my representative that I chose for the PAB is fighting on that as well. So I'm familiar with what's occurring there. I do think that if we just going back to the Department of Legislative Reference, that model fits pretty well with the current way we have the council president, but also the way that if you decide to have a president that's elected by the body, because then we've got all of these things that are all of the research and everything that I articulated through the department as I see it would still serve that council. So I think I could see it. I just wanted to let you know I'd see it both ways, that it could work in both ways. But thank you very much for your time today. I know you've listened to a lot of proposals, and I'm so grateful to all of you for serving and stepping up in this role. And please see council members as resources. And I look forward to what you might be proposing for us.
Okay. Other questions for Councilwoman Ramos before she signs off? This is your chance, commissioners. Okay, well, Councilwoman, before you go, I do have one question for you on the proposal around the council president. Do you think that the council president should be the person that succeeds the mayor in the event that the mayor leaves office before the term is over?
That is a good question. In the current configuration, that is a good question. So the way that it works in other jurisdictions that do not have the council president elected by at large, the administrator becomes the interim executive, or at least in Baltimore County, this is how it works. The interim, the city administrator becomes the interim executive until there can be a special election, depending on when that happens. So like if it's later on in the term, they might fill the term until the next election. But if it's the beginning of the term, they would serve for a certain amount of time and then there would be a special election. So if we go with the idea of having the council members electing the council president, I would suggest that we move in that direction for succession. In terms of the current configuration, I hadn't thought about an alternative, but it makes sense because the council president is elected at large by the voters. And so that in the current configuration makes sense from a succession perspective. It could also be the comptroller because the comptroller is the one with the money, or looking at the money. But right now, it is an elected position at large. And let me just say one last thing. Montgomery County, the way that their county council works is that they do have 2 at-large members elected to the council in addition to their 7 or 8 members or 9 members. Which by the way is mostly women. So we have some work to do there. But those 2 at-large members are not automatically council presidents. They still have to be elected by the body. So I understood the discussion earlier around, about representation and it's important to have, it might be important to have an at-large. That would be, you could still do that, but making sure that the council president is elected by the body, even if that at large is there, is something to think about. So, yeah, I think that, it really depends on the configuration of the council, how we would do succession.
Okay, thank you. In general, commissioners, I tend to believe that it's important that the person who succeeds the mayor has a citywide mandate that has been given to them by the voters. And I think that both Councilwoman Ramos and Councilman Dorsey have given an excellent defense of this proposed change. But I think that there are many arguments, sound arguments that are strong democracy arguments for leaving the current arrangement the way it is. And it's just like you may have heard Councilman Dorsey say that we shouldn't have term limits, and then also say that for the council president, there should be term limits. And that's not a contradiction necessarily. It just speaks to the very nuanced nature of how we approach democracy and get the most democratic value. Just as an aside, I think that we need more people who are elected at large on the council, just as a way to expand our leadership pool and to have so that voters have at their disposal a larger number of potential leaders that people know and have seen serving in office. Because without that, we will often find ourselves in the unfortunate position of having to vote for between three or four candidates that nobody really wants. But at this time, if there are no other questions or comments for Councilwoman Ramos, we certainly, are glad to give you the floor for any parting remarks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and I very much appreciate this discussion. I think that, you know, those of us who are operating in city government and watching city government, these discussions sometimes can get a little meaty, a little weedy. That's all good for me. And you've got some great people on the commission that will, I think, provide us with guidance for the next steps in our governance structure. So I'm grateful to all of you for serving. Thank you to my constituents that are on the commission. And thank you all very much for your work. I know you're spending a lot of time on this. And I'm happy to discuss the topics that I discussed or any topic that you're dealing with anytime. Thank you so much.
Okay. Councilwoman, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting, but if you have to leave, we understand as well.
I do have to sign off, so but thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Have a good evening. All right. Grateful to those two members of the council for thoughtful presentations, and grateful to you commissioners for your excellent questions and participation in the discussion. At this time, I'd like to give the floor to our lead staff person, Mr. Ben Guthorn. Ben, if you have some updates or housekeeping for us, this would be a great time to share it with us.
Thank you, Reverend. The administrative updates for tonight really focus on the vice chairs and chair of the committees, just to follow up with me directly about any future meetings that you need scheduled to make sure that we provide proper notice and make sure that, for example, Charm TV is able to participate. And as we do get closer, I know certain committees are working on reviewing presentations, or better said, proposals. So in as much as you would like any materials compiled or anything else to that effect, please let me know, and we'll be happy to work on that on behalf of the commission. I think other than that, I am, just to apologize, I'm a little behind on posting minutes for last week's meetings. We've been short-staffed and very busy in my department, so I hope to get to that early next week, if you'll just bear with me. And other than that, if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer those, and otherwise I hope everybody has a good evening.
Any questions for Mr. Guthorn or other members of the staff? All right. Well, before we adjourn, I do want to give commissioners the opportunity to ask any questions or raise any issues that are relevant to the work of the commission at this time. All right. Well, seeing no further points of discussion, questions, or comments, we'll adjourn this meeting of the Charter Review Commission for Baltimore City at 7:35 p.m. Thank you. Have a great evening.
Thank you,
Thank you
everyone.
so much. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you all.